everyone. My name is Debbie Perry, and I'm one of the program chairs for today's panel on esports partnerships. I want to thank you all for being here, and we were very happy to have you. I just wanted to let you know that you should have received an email about an hour before the panel started, which contained a link to the CLE materials for the program. If not, please email the Beverly Hills Bar about that. Also, you should be receiving your MCLE certificates, if applicable, within about 24 hours. So, and actually the folks at BHBA have just posted the links over in the chat. We are going to have the structure of this program a little slightly different than we initially anticipated. So we're going to have our first kind of mini panel focusing on venue partnerships and featuring Judd Hannigan, who's the CEO of Allied Esports International. And after that, there'll be a little Q&A, time for a little bit of Q&A, hopefully. You can put your questions into the chat and we'll hold them until the end of his segment. And also there's going to be a second kind of mini panel focusing more on teams and influencers with the remaining panelists. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going just to, in the interest of time, because Judd does have to jump off for another panel at 1, I'm just gonna introduce everybody by their names and the titles and company. So with that, oh yeah, I was going to say also for BHBA, there, if you want to check the events calendar, is the link is in the chat as well. So there's plenty of upcoming programs even next week. So here we go. First, I'd like to introduce Judd Hannigan. He's the CEO of Allied Esports International. Also, we've got on the call right now, we've got Mustafa Aijaz, who's the owner and VP of SoaR Gaming, based in Toronto. I think he's in Toronto right now with us. We've got Caroline Beall, who is Director of Partnership Operations at Immortals Gaming Club, and Keith Cooper, who's a partner at Morrison, Rothman LLP. And about to take it away to moderate the panel is Phil Ranta, who is the CEO of Wormhole Labs. Take it away, Phil.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you so much to the BHBA for having us. Sometimes when you work in the gaming industry, you don't oftentimes get this kind of attention. If you get attention from lawyers, generally it's a scary thing. So it's good to have this not be a scary thing. So thank you for having us. I just wanted to set the table a little bit. I have a feeling, based on past conversations I've had in the gaming space, that a lot of people understand that the gaming market is there. They understand that it's exciting and interesting and new, but might not know some of kind of the high level stats in terms of what's going on in the gaming world right now. So some quick kind of general overview stuff that I pulled this morning. Out of 8 billion people in the world, almost 40% of them are playing video games right now. That's 3.1 billion people globally who are playing video games. Nearly half of those are playing on a PC. So this is not just people downloading Candy Crush and then trying it once a week. These are actual gamers. So 26.6 million monthly esports viewers in 2021, which is up 11.4% from 2020. That's a heck of a growing market. The gaming industry global market is expected to surpass $138 billion, which is more than theatrical movies and music combined. The video game software publishing industry in the United States alone is a $31 billion industry in 2021. The largest prize pool in esports history is the International in 2021. Just happened, a Dota 2 tournament, the $40 million prize pool. 2 days ago, I believe Team Spirit took the $18.2 million biggest prize from that. So the money is real. The industry is very Brave New Worldy. There's tons of issues that are very different from, let's say, basketball or football, but some of them that are the same. So we've got an amazing panel to talk to all aspects of this. So I would love to start with just a quick round the horn where everybody gives a quick 1 or 2 minute introduction. I'll take the bullet first. My name is Phil Ranta. I've been working in the creator economy for about 15 years. Worked amongst apps, multi-channel networks. I was the head of gaming creators at Facebook for a while, and now I'm the CEO of a metaverse company, which is kind of like what if social network had gaming DNA, called Wormhole Labs, where our flagship product is launching early next year. So since he's in my upper left-hand corner, let's move it over to Mustafa.
Hi guys, I'm Mustafa Aijaz, also known as Crude in the gaming world. In the gaming world, we all have our little gaming monikers. I've been part of the gaming influencer world since like around 2010, back when I was just 13 years old. Throughout the early days of gaming on YouTube, I've seen the space evolve from its infancy to what it is today. Like Phil mentioned, all the stats. Started out as a creative in the space, to graphic design, branding, stuff like that, and then eventually ended up crossing paths with SoaR Gaming, a team that I now co-own. It started out as like a YouTube collective of gamers just posting videos and having fun. Back then I was also kind of like an influencer. This is like 5 years back. I had like around 400,000 followers across all social platforms. So I've kind of been in the influencer space myself as well, dealing with those partnerships and whatnot. And right now my full-time focus is as a vice president of SoaR is to kind of just navigate our brand from a creative standpoint to kind of compete with the big guys and keep working and doing cool stuff in the gaming world.
I love it. Thank you, Mustafa. And he's back in, I believe it was 2011 or 2012. The biggest thing in gaming online was trick shooting, and that's what I always associate SoaR with.
Modern Warfare 2 trick shotting back in the day.
I used to eat those videos alive. I loved them. Cool. Let's move over to Keith for a quick introduction.
All right. Hello, everybody. Keith Cooper. I am a partner at Morrison Rothman. And my background, basically doing a lot of business law, entertainment law, and eventually several years ago, I moved my practice over to Morrison Rothman because I'm at my heart and soul a big, giant gaming nerd. Love everything about the gaming industry, from the economics of it to the content creation to the technology. And I just wanted to immerse myself in it. And so I've been doing it there ever since. Since that time, I've been fortunate, obviously, working with one of the pioneers in the esports industry. That's Ryan Morrison, who's taught me a lot about the business itself, and I've learned quite a bit about the industry itself, as well as the issues that are involved in esports transactions. I've done several panels on the esports industry as a whole. I always look at it, though, from the content creator side of the equation. We represent a lot of influencers. We represent a lot of players. We work very closely with Evolve Talent Agency as well in negotiating and getting some of these deals done. So that's kind of what my overall background is. Again, I guess it's also worth mentioning, I do represent developers and publishers in the more traditional gaming space as well. So we style ourselves as a digital entertainment law firm. And so we try to help everybody, in that space on a variety of levels, from forming their entities to taking them through licensing IP, receiving licenses, acquiring the IP or licensing it out, doing merchandising deals and the like, and a lot of player contracts and influencer contracts.
Thank you, Keith. So he's our legal eagle on the panel. So if you go really deep into the law, he's going to be the one that answers that.
I'll be that guy.
I love it. Everyone needs that guy. It's great. Caroline, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Caroline Beall, Director of Partnership Operations at Immortals, like Debbie mentioned. So prior to getting into gaming, I worked at a company called Fullscreen, where I kind of worked on getting talent and creators into live event spaces. So my experience is really with digital creators, YouTubers, influencers, gaming streamers, etc. And from there, I kind of honed in on the gaming space about a little over 2 years ago. Where at Immortals, I do oversee our influencer and creator relationships, but also oversee our events at a high level. So I'm working a lot with venues and venue contracts, but also with influencer contracts, streamer contracts, integrating those streamers and influencers into our brand partnerships, integrating them into our brand initiatives as Immortals, and also using our pros, our pro teams, and those influencers at our events. So Immortals as a whole owns and operates professional esports teams. We have 3 in the Riot ecosystem right now with Wild Rift, League of Legends, and Valorant. But our parent company, Immortals Gaming Club, also has MIBR, based in Brazil, which is a Counter-Strike team and a Rainbow Six team, and a female Counter-Strike team as well. So I am the esports team person here to call us all a role. I'm the team girl.
I love it, and very excited to see where Wild Rift goes. So I was so stoked to see that Immortals had a team there. So, and last but certainly not least, joining us all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Judd Hannigan. Could you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. I am Judd Hannigan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Allied Esports. Our company is really about, we started in 2015, the first guys to ever build a dedicated esports arena. We did that in Beijing. And really the hypothesis was let's invest in infrastructure to give us a credible seat at the table with the game publishers and in this industry, to be more than just a tournament organizer, but also a facilitator and a group that elevates creators, content, and obviously competition. But also just for our own personal use, the ability to create content at scale. One stat that I love to kind of throw out, Phil, you ran through a number of them, but last year, 27 billion hours of gaming content consumed across YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. That number is going to be more this year. So 600 million, I'm in a panel and a conference now, 600 million hours a week is being consumed this year at the moment on average. So it's a really impressive space that we all get to play in, and it's super exciting. Background on me, I've always been in sports and entertainment for the most part. Started my career working for the Yankees, then moved into the city of New York doing official partnerships with a bunch of sports guys who kind of worked for Mayor Bloomberg. Those official partnerships had to clear the legal speculation and interest of the comptroller at the time. So a lot of interesting things to navigate in that world. And then I moved to China. Lived in China for about 11 years, helping sports properties come into the market. Large main client that I did that for the longest term was for World Poker Tour, which largely we modeled our business here after that. The idea of live events that create content that ultimately can be distributed and aggregate audience, and that's what we're doing in this space.
Thank you so much, Judd. And just a note to the audience, we are going to do a Q&A at the end of the segment number 1. So we're going to do one Q&A around 1 p.m. Then we're going to do one after segment number 2, which will be 1:30, 1:45-ish. Please click on that Q&A button on the bottom of Zoom instead of putting it directly inside of the chat. I'll try to catch what I can from chat, but it really helps if you organize it all inside there. And you've got a wealth of information amongst these panelists, so please, please, please jump in with your questions. Also, side note, Mike Lee from UTA and Brian Millman from Evil Geniuses unfortunately had to drop out of the panel. But who cares? We have 4 amazing people here, so I'm sure that they'll have plenty of talk about. That being said, Judd is currently at an esports conference in Las Vegas. He's doing another panel in 15 minutes. So we really want to take advantage of his time here. So anyone else can jump in on these. We're going to focus on him a little bit for the first 15 minutes, specifically around venue partnerships. I would say Allied Esports. Is it fair to say that you're probably best known for the HyperX arena? And I can't help but notice that HyperX is in the name. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about how that came together.
For sure. And we're most known, while we started in China, we expanded from there, and most known for our flagship venue at the Luxor. And we opened that up with a peripherals partnership, peripherals being headsets, mice, keyboards, etc. And with HyperX, one of the leading brands and peripheral providers in the world. And subsequently from there, we were able to then ink a naming rights partnership with them. So we've had, now we're in our second term of our naming rights partnership with these guys. So super excited, great partner. And certainly from the point of this conversation, it was interesting for us who hadn't done a naming rights deal in any of our venues to kind of navigate that, especially when you think about how we program our spaces. Because not only do we program our own content, but we also, we're a place where anybody can come in any day of the week and game and play, which is great exposure. They all get to wear use HyperX peripherals. But also we have a lot of professional events. We have a lot of influencer events. We have a lot of third-party gaming adjacent events that come into play. World Poker Tour films their final tables there, right? So there's a lot of, it's a really mega content creation facility. Navigating that with a naming rights partner and some of these outside events that have to come into the house that also bring their own peripherals partners, and also pro teams that bring their own peripherals partners. There was certainly a lot to talk about as we started to kind of, structure the framework of that initial deal back in 2018.
I can imagine, and I don't want to pry too much. First of all, when you walk into the arena, the first time I walked in, you get that wow factor, and the fact that HyperX is affiliated with that, like, oh my God, this is every gamer's dream feeling, is a pretty cool affiliation. But as you mentioned, everybody has a peripherals partner, right? So if it's another 10 esports teams, they each have their partner. How does that work with approvals and signage? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's funny. We'll start with the wow factor, because that wow factor starts from the plane, right? Because we have this really great partnership with MGM Resorts, Luxor being an MGM property, we've been able to, for all of our time here so far, secure branding on the building. In our first year and a half, we were on the side of the pyramid, and so you flying in, you could see it from all of it. It was a really impressive thing. Now we're on a tower next to the Luxor or next to the pyramid structure, and it's tremendous. It's great branding. It's awesome value for HyperX. We consider it awesome value for the industry as a whole. 40 million visitors in a non-COVID year come through Vegas. Great exposure to what we're doing and incite more interest in our space. And so navigating that, when again we've sold naming rights to a property within a property, and we don't own the greater property, so those rights of what goes where and how do we kind of enforce that and make sure we there was certainly a lot to navigate, and it wasn't just one-on-one. It was bringing in our partner and landlord into that equation too. But as you talk about peripherals, one of our most successful events when we opened up was bringing Ninja, popular influencer, streamer, and gamer, and bringing him onto our stage and having him kind of headline the Las Vegas Strip, building an entire event around him, where people from all around the world flocked in for the chance to play against him. And again, all these pros and folks were in the house. They all brought competing peripheral brands, and so we had to have that vision, knowing that was going to be an issue, right? And HyperX, great partner. They understand it, right? Their mindset is about getting their product in the hands of consumers, and obviously they want to see as many high-profile people in their using their product as well. But that mindset of, hey, you know what? We can't force the pros who already have their own deals. It just doesn't work. So there's a lot of things that we had to kind of envision about what those carve-outs would be. And as new things come up, we've got a great partner that we're aligned with, that we have open conversations about how to navigate these things. So we're certainly incentivized to try to convince people to use it. But today and all throughout the pandemic, we've been running a bubble environment for the Rainbow Six North America League each week, and again, there's just a slew of pro teams, right? 16 teams, I believe, that are in there, all with different deals. So HyperX gets that, the event is always going to be at HyperX Esports Arena, right? The content is always going to be able to call that out, but certainly what people are using, they're open to that equation.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a couple things there that I think a lot of people ask questions. First of all, the sheer amount of types of events, and then those are all also being affiliated with HyperX and your foundation partners and the people who own pouring rights, right? Like everything has to be this virtuous ecosystem where everybody gets along. Let's hone in a little bit, though, on who is actually hosted there. To what extent do you have to get all the partners that you have on board, including the publisher who owns the game that's oftentimes being played in these esports things, in order to hold events in these spaces?
Yeah, look, for us, we love third-party events coming in, right? But the soul, the lifeblood, is our proprietary programming. We don't have dark days in our arena unless something big is coming it requires a full setup, right? So we are, constantly having to navigate publisher guidelines, and that could be ever changing, right? So making sure we don't ever have a misstep there is super important, because owner of the IP that we're all looking to utilize. So that's a big step for us to make sure we're handling that properly. I'll use an example. For us, there's a lot of partnership categories that are sensitive or not allowed when using a lot of their IP. So game publisher IP. Then typically one could be sports betting, for example, right? No sports betting sponsors, no gambling sponsors and partnerships around programming for the bulk of the publishers out there. As CS:GO, publisher being Valve, somebody who's been more flexible in that regard, and we were the first folks to go out and clear regulatory hurdles last year to get one of our programs be able to take bets on in New Jersey. And so also having a sportsbook partner attached to that to make it a viable product, et cetera, and then ultimately then licensing the data and video rights from those things out in the market. So the venue itself is this place that ultimately warrants us and gives us the trust. We earn our trust from these publishers, that we're able to kind of navigate their rights and use them appropriately, the ones that they give us. But ultimately, we're always trying to see how we can engage with other partners to weave into that fabric and sometimes minefield of what's allowed.
Sure, it makes sense. So you touched on a little bit in that answer too, but Las Vegas, the Strip, the city, is a pretty major character in this player too. To what extent do you think that helps? What extent do you think it hurts? I mean, it's the land of conventions, but also Vegas has a lot of other things, stigmas around it, right? Do you think that this is something where it helps the brand? Where do you see the advantages there?
I think why are we here? Why did we build in Las Vegas? We had this budding group of properties that we were building and continue to build. We wanted a championship destination that had to inspire excitement from people all over the world, whether you lived in America or you lived anywhere. You say Las Vegas, you crack a little smile somewhere, right? So you're excited, and there's this anticipation. And I think what we offer for brands that want to interact in the gaming space is the ability to also harness that excitement of being in Vegas with them, right? The brand exposure on the side of the pyramid or on the side of the tower every day, all day is pretty powerful. Even just being a brand that's kind of has our front facing lobby that faces the casino, the amount of passersby that come through these facilities is quite awesome. Again, in a non-pandemic year, so I think that's a good thing for brands. I think brands want to be where they can get the most amount of exposure, and in addition to what we broadcast online, we get a lot of foot traffic and exposure here to a broad range of audience.
Yeah, and all of us gamers, thank you, because in Vegas, I was always like, I don't exactly know what to do except for go gamble, and now I find myself there most of the time, so that's great. There are so many, I mean, another part of just being Vegas and being an arena, so many brands are everywhere, right? So on top of just the events itself and the naming rights of the stadium, there's so many other considerations. What are, for example, I know that I believe ViewSonic is the official gaming monitor for the streamer room. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we inked to deal with them earlier this year on monitors. So new monitors, great, awesome monitors that are ultimately we want to provide the best gaming experience possible, right? What's going to make somebody want to come out and be out and come back again? And we know who's coming to our events each week, right? Because they're coming back again and again, and they're driving. Some of them drive 4.5 hours to be here every Saturday, and it's largely because it's a great gaming experience. It's a great event. They get to socialize. The community building aspect is huge. But we've got great partnerships with guys like ViewSonic. Another partner is Dream Seat, so for our gaming chairs. And one of the things I think is interesting about that, again, when you think about kind of pros and how they interact, and a lot of them have gaming chair sponsors and things. But when you think about events, like Dream Seat has this chair called Zip Chair, and so they actually can change the panel on their chair, so you can kind of change the branding, which we really loved for flexibility again in navigating some of those issues that come about when you've got competitive chairs and brands looking to interact with different events that come with their own set of brand partnerships.
I love that. Then of course there's just the fact that it's a physical space, right? Pouring rights, food, restaurants, right? Were those part of the negotiations as well, or was that something that was handled by Luxor?
So Luxor has a lot of its own pouring rights, but not all categories. So we've dabbled in some of that as well, and from time to time that changes, right? So it's certainly been an interesting thing to navigate between, again, a property owner, such a mega owner who's doing pouring rights across multiple properties in their portfolio, and then how do we navigate in between that? We've had a ton of interest in certain categories that we can't operate in, and then we've done fairly well in certain categories that we can. So it's certainly always a dance, right? I mean, I think we're always dancing, trying to figure out as where there's demand and where we can actually play legitimately in that equation.
Absolutely. And everyone out there, feel free to throw questions in the Q&A if you have them. Also, let's talk a little bit about the charity events there. A lot of people don't realize, but the gaming, especially game streamer and esports, very, very charitable crew, right? You're always hearing about multi-million-dollar raises. I feel like that's kind of pushed to the side a little bit when people talk about gamers, but I know you've done some big events in that space.
We have. We recently just did an event with Red Cross that spanned a couple of months, right? Where it started as a streamathon and a bunch of streamers raising money over a period of time that ultimately ended in what was known as the Rescue Royale. A bunch of players who competed. There were a variety of different streamers and different gamers, but they came in and all competed together in a Fall Guys tournament. And we're still seeing sort of positivity on social about this event that happened last Sunday. But in that regard, there's all the venues partnerships, but then again, there's the issues of dealing with talent and their relationships. And when you start dealing with something like that, we had a bunch of talent come out for that event that qualified through this process of raising money with the Red Cross, but also that played from home and integrated as well. And how do you integrate their streams and their partners? And so there's all sorts of complexities in the world of physical, and then of course in the broadcast.
And just because we only have a couple of minutes, I feel like we should touch on it very lightly, but we should touch on it, the COVID of it all. So we went into a recent very big lockdown and tourism slowed down a little bit. So what had to be considered for there in terms of closing, reopening? I imagine that there was a lot of legal matters that had to be considered.
Yeah, I mean, we closed right when everybody else did. Largely, we took our direction as when we could be open, when we couldn't, from obviously the regulatory bodies here in Clark County in Nevada, but also the state of Nevada. And really, as MGM opened and closed, that's how we followed it. So we all closed on, I think, March 16th, and then we opened here on June 25th. So Luxor opened on June 25th of 2020, which was like, at the time, we were going to do it because we're good partners. We wanted to be there with them, but we weren't sure what was going to happen, right? And the social distancing, like our typical space, we've got 130 PCs. We had to cut that way down for social distancing and obviously mask wearing. But we had the first day where I was like, are we going to get 5 people maybe that storm in here? And we had 40 people waiting to get in before we raised the gate. Like it was such an interesting time. I wasn't expecting much. But it was interesting. We were this outlet for people, not only online for our online tournaments, but especially in our physical stuff. And again, brands, partners, they're concerned, right? They're like, hey, what are we doing there? And we had to prove and earn everybody's trust that we were going to be okay. And knock on wood, but we never had anybody come to us and say, I was exposed and I got it there. That never happened. And we did events all throughout the pandemic from June onward. So we're pretty excited about that, and certainly excited about where we are today. Right, numbers going down. We're back to mask wearing over here in Vegas, but but the social distancing and the clampdown on numbers of and gatherings is not there. That ended on. I want to say that ended on June 1st of this year. So that's been exciting. And I'm at a conference today, which is, I think everybody's saying, oh my goodness, we're gathering again. So it's quite nice to see the direction we're moving in right now.
Well, cool. Judd, it's officially 1:00. I think we've pumped as much info from your brain as we can possibly get in that short period of time. I know you've got to run, but any final thoughts?
No, I'll tell you, we're in a landscape that's always changing. Right. I think it's certainly nascent when you think about traditional legal stuff. That's certainly what we've seen, but it's always changing and it's rapidly changing. And so you've always got to be on your toes to be able to address new things that are coming, and new things are coming for sure. So we're all finding different ways to do things, and even just in production, right? This year we were a total physical production, and we went heavy into remote production, and navigating a lot of that was interesting as well. So I'm interested in hearing about the second part of the panel as well, because I think there's a lot of great things to talk about. Absolutely.
Judd, GGs, thank you so much for joining, and have a good convention over there.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Judd. All right. We're now officially moving on to panel. Now we got rid of the riffraff. No, I'm just kidding. Judd is great. But we've got another amazing 3 people here. Thank you all for your patience so much as we got as much out of Judd as we could. But now we've got a big, beautiful hour with all of you. So we're going to move on to panel number 2, which is very relevant to everybody on this panel, especially with your histories, which is talking about teams, players, influencers, and brand deals. Very, very hot topic as this creator economy has exploded, as esports, as influencers, and as skill players has exploded. Let's jump right into it. I would love to just start on the brand deal side. So you know what? I think it would probably be best if we started with Keith, the legal eagle of the crew. How do you think that brands are currently viewing this space?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of opportunity. If you look at some of the numbers that you've already mentioned, and others, the last time that I looked at it, like Forbes and a couple of the other financial magazines, or is that still a word? The various resources that have projected right now we're at about $1 billion to $1.2 billion esports industry alone. But Forbes and others have projected that to grow by 2022 to 2 billion. Some even say 3 billion, certainly within the next 4 or 5 years. That's a lot of revenue. There's a lot of eyeballs. When you look at the competitions, whether it's Fortnite, League of Legends, Dota, whatever it is, you have these things that are streaming to hundreds of millions of people at any given time, concurrently 40, 50 million people in various instances. That's a lot of eyeballs. That's a lot of branding opportunities. And what I think we're seeing right now a little bit is a transition, not a transition, but a lot more non-endemic brands are beginning to participate in this as well. And for people that don't know, endemic brands are basically those types of brands that are directly affiliated with the sport. So in this case, maybe it's gaming chairs or gaming controllers and various computer devices, computer peripherals, software, whatever. But now, of course, we're seeing more non-endemic brands like energy drinks and regular, sports drinks. And we're going to see, I think a broader audience come in, or a broader brand. It can be car manufacturers, whatever it is, as we're seeing the demographics increase significantly. It's expanded from just a male-dominated area into, almost equal part female-dominated. Or equal part female participation. The age group has moved, I think, from kind of an 18 to 24-year-old demographic to the average age of gamers now is late 30s, early 40s. So as the demographics are expanding, as there's more money invested in it, and as the number of eyeballs and the events are growing, these non-endemic brands are anxious to get a hold of this because there's a huge marketing opportunity for them, an advertising opportunity to reach a lot of people in a segment that they don't reach through traditional advertising. So that's how I think it's kind of shaping up right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. Where there's reach and loyalty, there will be brands, right? Yeah. And you touched on energy drinks. They have been a great friend to the gaming community since the jump of influencer marketing. Speaking of which, I would love to just move over to Mustafa on that side. I mean, you guys were doing COD trick shot videos in 2011, and I'm sure Monster Energy Drink was knocking on your door because they were sponsoring everything Call of Duty at that time. So how are you working with brands, and how has that evolved to how you work with brands now?
So brands, over the past few years, what we've really noticed is that brands think it's cool to be in gaming because gaming is cool all of a sudden, right? And back in the days in 2012, we were one of the first partners for an energy drink company called G Fuel. We've been working with G Fuel for like 8 years now, 9 years now, and it all started as they are an endemic brand to the space. They all started, with a very cheap, with a very low, inexpensive way to enter the market, where they were just sending product out to all the influencers. At the time, the term influencer wasn't even coined yet, I think. Everyone was just getting the product, and it was a very easy way to get in and get to a lot of people really fast. They had explosive growth over the years, and now they're one of the top companies in the energy drink category as a whole in terms of social media reach and all that stuff. And they're strictly just social media only. They're just now entering into the retail and all that kind of space, right? So over the years, SoaR Gaming has really seen all these partners kind of come in and they'll come in on a short-term way. Well, they come in by like a campaign-to-campaign basis or a shorter-term deal. But when they realize the power of what the influencers can do and how resonated, like how their audience and their community so resonated with that particular influencer, more so than even a celebrity or like a TV commercial, I think it really gets them like excited, and they kind of get into those longer-term commitments. G Fuel, for example, like they're doing some pretty big stuff, and compared to what they were doing with us back in 2012 when we were just Call of Duty trick shotters, now we're doing content with them, in-person content, in-person booths, events, stuff like that. Obviously we haven't been able to do that because of the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, things were booming, and COVID has just accelerated that for us, I feel like. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I'm starting to see G Fuel on store shelves, and it kind of blows my mind.
Yep.
I've just always thought of it as an e-commerce brand focused on game streamers on YouTube and Twitch. And now it's like, oh, I can buy it. I forget where I was. Ralph's, I don't want to misrepresent that, but I saw it somewhere.
Club,
what?
Sam's Club has it. Yeah. All those retail spots, 7-Elevens. It's really crazy. And it's all derived from just influencer marketing, which is insane.
Absolutely. Caroline, the Immortals, like a lot of core esports going on there, which I know has kind of a different entree to the branded market a little bit. There's also opportunities with that. What are you wearing on your jerseys? What are you putting in your top banners? Can you talk a little bit about how Immortals is working with brands and how that's evolving?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, it's different when you talk about teams and working with brands than with specific influencers. So the teams and our goal and how we, pitch it to brands and what brands are looking for when they come to us as potential sponsors is honestly kind of the emotional connection that exists when teams have sponsors. I think we can all kind of relate to a sports team we've grown up watching, and we don't even know why, but we know the sponsors in the stadium, or we know the sponsors that were on the jersey the year they won the World Series. And there's a different kind of connection there as opposed to an influencer, which I think is like you're sort of emulating somebody that you look up to, or that is, in a cultural space that you want to be in. Teams are more of this fandom that you're following. And, so with our team sponsorships, we have kind of the traditional asset list that teams can tap into for sponsorships. So that's jersey, like you mentioned. That's also our physical spaces. So our physical places where our pros actually train, we can, sponsor the kitchen, the training room, the video review room. We can have those kind of have exclusive category partnerships, as well as the broadcast. So this is like a whole nother thing to dive into. But, when you watch the franchised esports leagues on broadcast, there are certain assets that are definitely allocated towards the league. The league gets to sell those, just like the NBA or the NFL. There's also certain assets that are for team specific. So teams have certain ones they can tap into and sell. Obviously, the eyeballs on the esports broadcast, the official, pro games are massive. So that's what brands are really looking to tap into a lot of the time. We also then can put on our own events that are not the official competitions with our league. So we can put on one-off tournaments or tournaments with our brand partners that are with influencers, with our pros, with our fans, community tournaments. And when we do those, the breadth of opportunities is much more open. We can sell all the broadcast assets we want, for the most part, with approval with the publisher, but really we can brand that stream and include graphics across the entire Twitch or YouTube or Facebook, whatever stream we're doing. And that's another big opportunity for us. We definitely still also look into the influencer branded space as well. Our pros do kind of operate as influencers for us in some capacity. The ones that are looking to grow their brand and some of the pros that are kind of wanting to lean into that, we love to help them grow and we want them to grow. So it's kind of inverted from where traditional sports is right now, where I kind of think a lot of times esports teams are helping their pros grow their brand and become maybe that influencer whenever their pro career maybe comes to an end. They can continue that. And a lot of times the pros on our teams are actually looking for that guidance and wanting help growing their brand and learning how to work with brands. We also tap into traditional influencers who are not pro gamers, who are just streamers and have, big followings and personalities. We tap into them as well. when it's best for our brand, when that makes the most sense for us, as opposed to looking to pros for that. So there's a lot of different ways to tap in here, but yeah, from the team side, there's kind of that traditional team sponsorship opportunity that you can compare to traditional sports.
I love it. And we'll double back later on in the panel on the difference between influencers and players and where the intersection is, because I think that's really interesting. In the meantime, we got a couple of Q&As that I think are very relevant to brand deals specifically. So I'd like to address those now instead of at the end before we move on. One for Mustafa, were you involved in Machinima at all in the early stages of the YouTube gaming industry? If so, how would you compare the framework and general structure of Machinima to today's gamer influencer entities?
Machinima is actually like back in the day when I was a child, really. That's how I got into gaming. Machinima used to operate more as kind of like an MCN and a collective of gamers and partners that were kind of under that one umbrella, that made similar type of content, whether it be Call of Duty or fastest way to get a nuke on Modern Warfare 2, for example. I think the space has really shifted from that, but in some cases it's also a little bit of the same. And what I mean by that is you'll still have your influencer groups and people that are kind of making content together and doing stuff together, and the framework's kind of like the same there, where they're doing stuff on like a primary channel. Think Sidemen on YouTube, for example. Think the Misfits that have a podcast session and everything, FaZe Clan. But at the same time, it's also shifted a little bit because YouTube and the content creator economy it's just like very different than what it used to be. People are just out to get the most views possible, and sign the biggest sponsorships and partnerships. And back then, you don't really see gamers partnering up with a lot of big brands. There was a couple of Red Bull athletes at the time, Nate Shot being one of them. And now you see that Red Bull is a player in the esports space now. And things have definitely changed, I think, for sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A lot of people forget that at the time when Machinima was really dominant, there was no way to see people's viewership or statistics. Yeah. It was even hard to get good stats if you were a YouTuber. A lot of people they thought YouTube was just sneezing pandas. When you heard about gaming on YouTube, people didn't know if it was legal or not. They're like, this isn't owned IP. And like people were literally using mini DV cameras in order to record their sessions, then doing voiceovers on it. Like it was a very hacked together industry. So those early movers, you needed a Machinima to organize, but now you've got
to organize everything.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
Another question from E. Haldeman. This actually might go very well into Caroline, the Toyota SoCal case study. But he said, can each panelist give some specifics on deals in the respective areas, including ranges of deals, money and fee? Of course, don't go into monies and fees you can't talk about, and terms that are specific to that type of deal. So Caroline, do you want to touch on Toyota SoCal with whatever you can say?
Yeah, that'd be great. So our partners one of our current partners is still Toyota SoCal. And in the past year and a half, we've seen really great success with working with them and activating with our localized teams. So, the LCS, which is the League of Legends North American League, is not regional. However, it is technically based in Santa Monica, and the teams do play out of Santa Monica. So we get to tap into that and use a lot of marketing around, taking our guys to the matches at the LCS arena in a Toyota. We found a lot of creative ways to really make that regional, because Toyota's obviously goal here was to highlight SoCal. The SoCal Toyota dealers is technically our partner, not Toyota National. And so we found a lot of creative ways to highlight SoCal specifically with our teams and pros through content, through actually having a physical branded car that had Immortals logos and coloring all over it, which we still have, which is super fun to drive around. And also through our jerseys. Jersey logo was huge on broadcast as well. They got that hit on broadcast every time our players played. So, we had brand studies ran, and honestly, it's been really exciting to see that the demo that they're looking to really hit, which is this, 18 to 34-ish, range, younger person, is actually starting to see a gap between affinity towards Honda and SoCal, between Honda and Toyota. And, where you directly attribute that to, it could be a couple different places, but especially they believe that they're focusing in the gaming area has been huge there, specifically to SoCal. So, you know, we've done a lot with even the colleges in the area. They've sponsored 2 different collegiate tournaments we did that were just with SoCal colleges. It was a League of Legends tournament, and those college kids were very aware of the brand, and the brand Toyota even gave away a car to somebody who ended up doing did a March Madness style bracket where you picked which college you think was going to win, and whatever bracket was the most accurate, they won a Toyota. So really high value, I think, like deep engagement with the SoCal region with Toyota, and we've seen a lot of success with Affinity in their specific demo they're looking to hit, which, you know, as a esports company, we are uniquely positioned to kind of offer them that exact demo. You know, from what it looks like on a deal side, really from like a deliverables and how it's kind of broken out. Obviously, I can't go really into the financials here, but what it looks like is we essentially go to the brand with what we can offer them from a team side. So that's, like I mentioned, jerseys, that's any broadcast hits that are possible with the league. And then that's kind of our traditional, just like competitive asset. So that's who won the match, who's the MVP of the match, schedule for the month, etc. So we have those assets that we could sell, and we could technically give to Toyota or give to another brand. And then we also have this creative custom content. So us driving our players in a Toyota to the matches and creating skits and fun different kind of personality pieces is creative content that we build into the contract as well. And finally, tournaments. So, you know, the community play was these community collegiate tournaments that were also part of the deal. So we have all these different little areas that we tap into with our deal with them. And, you know, they really are looking to us to give them the expertise and our opinion as to what the gaming community wants. I think, Mustafa, you kind of hit on this, but, you know, endemic versus non-endemic brands have a really big task here in making sure they go into gaming in the right way. You could like buy a bunch of ad space on Twitch and just like blast your name everywhere, and it's just that wouldn't be my suggestion. If you come into gaming in an authentic way, gamers see through BS, for lack of a better term, I think almost better than any market. And so when Toyota, for instance, goes to Immortals and says, what should we do? We want to hit this audience. It's up to us to go to them and say, here's what we think is best for our brand, which means is best for our community and our fans and our audience. And they look to us and they go, okay, let's do it. So that's how we kind of hit them with a tiered approach. Obviously, the big engagement and the big viewership plays through things like jersey sponsorship and broadcast and our social, like competitive, consistent assets. But the more creative content and the community tournaments are things that they wouldn't know how to do on their own, and they wouldn't be able to come up with on their own. And they need a brand, either an esports team or an influencer who's already activating in the space in that way, to kind of guide them to the gamers in an authentic way and provide them with something that they actually want to watch and want to see. So I know for a fact the students at UCLA and at USC and at LMU and at Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Fullerton, all who participated in these tournaments, you know, they're well aware that essentially Toyota and Immortals partnered to bring them this tournament, and they would otherwise not have had the opportunity to compete against each other in that way on, you know, a stage that big, a virtual stage that big, which was on our Twitch channel, providing their communities with the opportunity to win a car. So it's trying to take what the brand wants to do and bring it to gamers in a way that is actually received well and not like just a logo slap.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you touched on endemic and non-endemic brands and how specifically the gaming community can see through things, as we just saw with the Coca-Cola spot that got thoroughly dragged on Twitter for about a week. I won't get into it, but Google Coca-Cola esports and read some articles, have some fun, watch the video. I believe that the number one word that was used on Twitter was cringy, and most people in the gaming world would tend to agree. So yeah, Keith, I would love to have you dive into the second part of that, which are what specific terms when it comes to gaming and brand deals on the gaming side might be different than, say, non-gaming influencer marketing terms?
Well, I think I'd approach it, you know, I always look at it kind of from a top-down view. You know, the difference between gaming and traditional sports is, and this is what we've oftentimes discussed, is that in traditional sports, nobody owns the game of basketball. As one example, nobody owns the game of football. Anybody can start a basketball basketball league or a football league, and there's no restrictions on that. Whereas it's a whole lot different in the gaming space, because Riot Games, for example, owns League of Legends. They own that property, and therefore they control that property and all the rights to do everything with the property from the top down. And I mean, from the creation of the league to the broadcasting rights themselves, to the display rights, to the streaming, the streaming rights on down. And even down to how they control the end users, ultimately the players of the game, what they can or cannot do with the game. And as a result of that, I think that at the top level, at the league level, for example, the leagues might look at the brands, and they want brands associated with the league itself. And what we often do is it kind of filters down. So if the league has certain categories or sponsors reserved for itself because they want to do that, they will allow teams to go out and get sponsorships on the team level, and do their brand partnerships with these various teams. And I kind of think for the teams, a good marketing message might be like for Monster Energy drink, the marketing message would be better than Adderall. I don't know, but I'm just saying that that's relevant actually to the point, because how it's divided up is that, the teams get the sponsorships and the brand deals that the league itself, the publisher itself, has not secured for itself. And then after the team gets it and secured this deal, oftentimes when you get to the influencer level or the player level, and player and influencer are often one and the same thing, they kind of get the crumbs. And what we always fight, as an example, as talent representatives, and by talent I'm including whether it's an esports player or an influencer, on the talent level, the tension for us is, I personally don't negotiate, with the league themselves. But where the teams are concerned, the negotiations that we get into is they try to reserve sponsor. Really what they want is approval rights over any independent sponsorship that the talent might get. I always try to push back on that, for example. I think we do generally try to push back on that, because we want the talent to have the ability to go out and get their own independent sponsors and not have to get everything approved by the team. But there is a recognition where the team is concerned, whether it's the team or the league, that they have an image, they have a brand that they want to protect. And as a result of that, I do understand the team's desire to want to have some approval rights over a talent's sponsorship deals as a general proposition. But how I try to address it anyway is I want to negotiate in like a Schedule B into the agreement, and one of two things is typically acceptable, where the team can reserve for itself, okay, these are our sponsors, you can't do any sponsorships with them, and they'll identify some of the league sponsors as well and say you can't do anything with them, everything else is fair game. Oftentimes, though, they can't identify a particular sponsor, they might just have a category. So we'll say, fine, category is energy drinks, and the team and or the league, you get energy drinks. We have the right to go get, other sponsors outside of that. It doesn't always cure the problem, again, because, if, for example, the sponsorship of the team is to, in honor of Judd being in Vegas, if I'm the talent and I get my team sponsorship to be, the Bunny Ranch out there outside of Las Vegas, the team's going to figure that does not reflect well on our brand. And the same thing is, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, various political, affiliations and that sort of stuff. So I understand the need, but typically what I do want to see is the talent have the, if we mark these categories or these sponsors and reserve those. And the way I look at it is the player or the talent usually has an obligation in the contract not to do anything that's detrimental to the team brand and not to do anything that's disparaging of the team brand. So I think, basically if you go out and get one of those sponsors, it's presumably covered under what we'll call the morals clause. It's not truly the morals clause, but or the behavior clauses that are in there, so that you're not engaging in, including by getting sponsorships, any conduct or affiliations that's detrimental to the brand. But short of that, and we can even agree, we will not get any sponsors that are detrimental to the brand. But short of that, I'd like to see the talent have the flexibility and the ability to go out and secure their own deals that are most lucrative to them without having to sit and wait for team approval. And the only other thing I'll mention on that is oftentimes in there, the teams, they'll include language in there that says the team has approval rights, but not to be unreasonably withheld or delayed. And, you know, okay, that's a measure of protection, but it still slows things down and it doesn't give the talent the control over their own independent income stream and their own independent brand that I personally want to see for them as, you know, content creators and talent representatives.
Absolutely. The addition of a team is vastly different than, say, your average vlogger, which I think brings us to an important topic, which is, we've touched on it quite a bit, but maybe this would be good for Caroline. In short, influencer versus player versus someone who's both versus someone that's neither. Where does that line drawn?
Well, an influencer is anyone who has an audience who's engaged and ready to listen. So anyone can be an influencer. A CEO of a company can be an influencer, and they often are in the gaming space.
I assume you're talking about me. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Phil is.
Exactly.
Linked.
So our pros are influencers in the sense that they have a captive audience who care about what they're up to and what they're doing. How much time our pros can allocate to growing their brand, or how much interest they personally have in growing their brand and leaning into the influencer side of things really varies from player to player. We at Immortals really have a real big priority to want to grow our players' brands for them and for us. I mean, everybody wins if their brand grows. And to be honest, a lot of the pros, what it's taken to become a pro gamer, and this is, I think, a clear distinction that when I used to work in the content creator space and like YouTuber space, I didn't totally understand. You know, the pro gamers, there's like almost no pro gamers in the world. You know, there's fewer pro gamers than there are pro football players in any given one video game. So it is so hard to be performing at that level, and you could be obsolete so quickly as well. I mean, the reaction times could change so quickly, and suddenly you're in one season and you're out the next. And so, to be honest, the amount of focus and training that's taken to get to that level oftentimes meant that you haven't spent a lot of time growing your brand. You might not have as big of an audience as someone who streams, 6 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and who's grown this really captive audience. So honestly, for the most part, if I wanted to blanket statement it, usually our pros are just that while they're competing competitively. They're pro gamers, and some of them have bigger followings than others. And you'll see across different teams have leaned more heavily into pros with bigger audiences versus some teams have leaned into pros that are just more competitive and haven't really focused on their brand and their social following as much. And then, really bread and butter influencers tend to not be pros. They tend to be the people who are streaming, who spend a lot of time on Twitch talking to their fans, who, have YouTube channels that they're expanding and growing with, creative content. And they are not pro gamers. They are not as good at Call of Duty as a pro Call of Duty player is. But it's very backwards because oftentimes a fan might actually prefer to watch the influencers duke it out in Call of Duty than potentially pros duke it out. And that's so different from traditional sports. And it's something that I think people don't understand is while the pros definitely command an audience and it's impressive, you have to play the game and know the game well to understand why pros are so good at their game and to respect their skill level. If you're going at it to have a laugh and hear guys or girls have some banter and have some, trash talking to each other while they're playing, that's likely going to be on the streamer side. And that's people who are having fun on Twitch and kind of playing in a less competitive, less serious atmosphere. So I think people go back and forth. Once you're done being a pro, you could then become more of an influencer. You could start as an influencer and go be a pro. So this fluid space, and Mustafa, I know that you probably, it's interesting. Exactly.
Think SoaR, think Ninja, like those guys were pro players at first, right? Like they started by being the best in the world at a certain game. And as that time moved on, because reaction times are a real thing. You're good at the game this season and you're not good anymore. Like you're not good enough to play with the new guys, right? So SoaR, same thing. Like this guy was one of the best players that CSGO's ever seen. And he was in the season, he was playing at the top level for a very long time. And at a certain point, he said, "Hey, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm going to become a streamer now." And now he's one of the most successful streamers on Twitch. And the story is the exact same for Ninja, who was one of the pros in Halo. He played H1Z1 back in the day, and even Fortnite to a certain degree. I think he wanted to play like competitively, but Fortnite wasn't competitive at the time. And he saw his opening where there was a gap in the market for someone to be like the streamer to watch. And he took it. And these guys are influencers, and pro players are completely separate people. And that's a very, very big distinction that people sometimes don't make. Pro gamers are not necessarily streamers, and streamers are not necessarily pro gamers. There can be overlap sometimes. However, that's usually not the case, because these pro gamers really are putting in like 18 hours a day sometimes, just perfecting their craft.
Yeah, it's always.
I was just gonna jump in. It's also worth noting, there's such a hybrid, because even in an esports contract, one of the things that we negotiate in there is the esports players' streaming requirements. And, that's a big deal. It's a big part of it, because, as Mustafa points out, these guys are practicing 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then they have to squeeze in 40 hours, 30 hours, whatever is negotiated of streaming time as well. And it's good for the brand, because we negotiate in there the size, the prominence, the placement, for example, of the overlays for the team logos, or for the sponsor logos and that sort of thing. But what's interesting to me also about that is, I agree, so many people retire from esports at 24 because their Twitch muscles are no longer what they used to be, and all of a sudden they're old. Sorry, Mustafa. You're old. So but I mean, what happens is then they retire and they become streamers. But a lot of teams, in my experiences, I've seen, I've been asked this question in the past. Do teams, and I leave it to Caroline and Mustafa, do teams prefer top influencers or top players? You can get a player that might not be the best player, but might have millions of more followers on their social media than some of the top players. And that's important to teams, because these top players that are becoming influencers can also help promote the brand through their streaming. It's not necessarily always about who's the best player and who's going to win a tournament or a league. Sometimes they actually will sign just as good of deals to a lesser player that's got a bigger following. So these things blend together quite a bit, and it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, my favorite comparison is like MTV's Rock and Jock. Like, they're all playing basketball, but some of them are getting the attention because they're Justin Bieber, and some of them are getting the attention because they're maybe a player that people don't know as much, but the dude can play basketball, right? So
I was actually surprised that the Biebs has got some game.
He's got some game, yeah. I mean, it's funny how when you see Rock and Jock basketball, how easy it is to pick out the celebrities and the short ones. But there's actually a really interesting question that came in that I think, Mustafa, you'd be perfect for, because you've kind of seen a lot of the iterations of this. But with respect to valuations, what's your perspective as to how the success of teams, players, and influencers is measured in deal making? Right? As Keith touched on, it's not just about how much reach you have, because you might just be amazingly good and then you've got that affinity, but reach certainly helps, right? And so what's the calculus that's going on there?
So I think sometimes it's really arbitrary, right? Sometimes a player, if you're going to like the professional team side of things, a player and a team is so good that the top 3 team in the world, there's a value being associated with partnering up with those guys, because say if they're partnered with a peripheral brand and that team is winning, those peripherals are probably going to perform really well, because most of these players that want to play at that level are probably going to buy those peripherals, for example. But the same thing with the influencer side, like influencers are more, since they have a bigger reach, they're able to motivate and get more conversions on sales, on whether it's a non-endemic brand or an endemic brand. For example, SoaR Gaming is a primarily influencer-driven company, as opposed to Immortals, who's more so kind of like a professional play, along with a hybrid with influencers as well. At SoaR, we're more so focused on the reach of our influencers, and that's kind of like a big reason why we would sign these guys onto our roster, because the bigger reach we have and the better conversions that we're able to pull on any sort of product category, the better for the actual deal when we're actually going to market with in certain categories. Right now, we're partnered up with RBC, which is one of the biggest banks in the world. They're actually the top bank in Canada, and their goal right now has really just been, hey, like, we want to do an authentic way of showing to the entire world what it, like, the money is not a taboo topic. And in gaming, and specifically in our like age bracket right now, money is a touchy subject. People don't like talking about money, and they want to get in that way. Is there, and when we're actually talking about RBC, we're not really calling out RBC directly in any of those content pieces, right? But there's still a lot of value to those brands to just kind of get their logo on the side when you're talking about, hey, like, streaming income does this, and this for me, as opposed to something like a peripheral sponsorship is more like, hey, how many sales can you guys motivate, or where's our peripheral being shown and whatnot, and stuff like that. And the valuation side, these deals can range anywhere from 6 figures on a yearly basis to like 7-figure deals. It really varies and depends on the actual brand, and depends on the term of the contracts, and the deal, and stuff of that nature.
Yeah, and
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, how we technically value it. Again, it just ranges. It depends. It's like from a team side. What is your team's brand? If your team's brand is excellence and competitive excellence, you're gonna lean into the best possible players, regardless of their reach. However, like, the best possible player is bound to have some kind of significant following, but maybe they're definitely not an influencer, really. So it depends on what your brand is. I think a lot of teams are trying to create a balance there and have a mix, have some really competitively, top tier players, and also lean into some players who obviously are pro, competitive level, but are also leaning into their following and are, maybe brand safe, would help our partners out and providing reach. Obviously there's a morals clause and all these things, and everyone has to be relatively brand safe, but some people carry these partnerships better than others. So it just depends on what your brand identity is. Are you the Yankees, or are you a development org who's maybe growing players, and you want to lean into more influencer personalities and develop competitive success down the road, as opposed to buying competitive success potentially with your roster. From a team side, that the valuations just depends on what your brand initiatives are and goals.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I ever saw a 7-figure influencer marketing deal, I went, wow, this is never going to happen again. And now they're just everywhere, right? So, it's the market has grown with it. The time is going really, really quickly, but I want to get into, let's say, the deep legal stuff that the Beverly Hills Bar Association is going to get really into. We'll call this one Keith's Corner, but everyone else can chime in whenever they want. First thing that a lot of people have been asking about is that waterfall, right? Because there's the game publisher that makes the game, and then there's the platforms the game's displayed, and then there's the esports org, and then there's the players, and there's the brand, right? There's a ton of cooks that get into the kitchen really, really, and the venue, of course, as we talked to with Judd earlier. How does that waterfall work? How does it all play together? Is there mechanisms that are put in place to simplify all of this? How does that work?
Well, I don't know that there's mechanisms to simplify it, but I think if you look at it, it's at its base level. A bunch of lawyers on the line. I think it's under the Copyright Act. I believe it's Section 106 of the United States Copyright Act, which sets forth the 5 or 6, exclusive rights that you have as a copyright owner. So if you own the game, if you're the publisher, you own the game. First and foremost, you own the right to copy the game. You own the right to create derivative works out of that game, which comes into play. And we see that in gaming quite a bit, probably less in esports. You guys would know better than me than in traditional gaming, but this is where mods come in and everything else. But certainly comes into play, like creating sequels out of the games. The rights, the Section 106 also includes the right of public display, which is if you're in a venue and they're showing it on the screens there, that's a public display of a copyrighted work. It also comes into play the right to distribute. the work as well, which comes into play. I think and the broadcast right is basically included within that as well. So the way it starts, when they create the league, they grant out the various licenses to the teams to participate in the league, and some pay, Overwatch League, what are they paying? $20-30 million as a franchise fee just for the right to have a team. And what they're really paying for is the ability to compete using the brand of Overwatch more than anything else, because that can be very lucrative. And then all of these rights on down in terms of the waterfall, any merchandising rights with respect to the brand itself and the use of the brand. And in many instances, if it's Fortnite or otherwise, despite their own copyright issues with all the dance moves, I think they won all those cases actually. They grant out the rights to use the character, and they can allow merchandise to be created out as a result of that. But it filters down basically to most of these games, even for the end users. I believe in pretty much all circumstances, people don't actually buy the video games that they're playing. They're licensing them, and every game has with it an end user license agreement. And in the end user license agreement, most of the ones that I've looked at, for example, they make provision to allow you to stream it, which is a reproduction of it or a public display of it, depending on if it's streamed or downloaded or whatever. But they grant users the right to do that. They grant users the right to play these games online, not to commercialize it, but they do allow them to do that, which is what opens the door for these influencers and other people that are playing these games and getting their following, because by allowing them to do it in a non-commercial fashion, it's drawing a lot of attention to all of these games. I think it's worth noting, for example, really the explosion, just historically, the explosion of esports as a whole can be traced back really to the advent of Twitch back in 2011. And it was there that people started playing games competitively online because they were allowed to do that. And more people started gravitating to it, going, hey, that's pretty cool. I could play my game online with my friends. And then all of a sudden, people started watching it. And it became tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of people started watching it on Twitch. None of that would have been allowed if it wasn't allowed from the top down at the publisher level, ultimately to allow the end users the opportunity to use their IP.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just want to double click on one part of what you said, because I bet there's a lot of questions going on in the audience, which is they have the non-commercial right to do it. But a lot of these gamers are selling sponsorships against it. They're running ads on YouTube. Are all of these people just breaking the law and the publishers are kind of doing a little bit of that? Or
I think it's possible that is done in many instances. But they do. I am aware that they have looked the other way in many instances as well, simply because of the viewership and the exposure, to the game. And as they're not monetizing the game; they're monetizing their YouTube channel, for example. But so many of those things also are done as in a permissible way, and that's because the publisher grants the right to the league or the teams, and the teams grant the right to the players. The players then have that right, specifically contractually, to go ahead and do that. But I am aware in some instances where they have just looked the other way because it's good for their brand. They've got so many people viewing it that it helps. It helps the popularity of the game, which drives sales of the game ultimately. And so I'm aware of that. I'm also aware of other instances where they've gotten DMCA takedown notices as well. So I don't know the percentage of when they look the other way, when they don't. But I think it's kind of a mixed bag, is my guess. I haven't really studied it.
Yeah, it feels like... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from obviously, when better for a publisher than having millions of people streaming their game on Twitch, and I think they understand that. So, what Keith said is totally right. There's a little bit of both going on. With regards to using the game in competitive tournaments, there's like very clear guidelines. So there's things they have, the Riot and Activision Blizzard, they have community guidelines that essentially say if you want to run a tournament and it's under a $10,000 prize pool, and it's going to be broadcasted on Twitch, but it doesn't have sponsors attached. You have the right, you have the license to go do it. You don't even really need to get approval from us. If it's going to have a $10,000 up prize pool and you are going to use our name in the title, then you need approval from us. And if it's going to be even a higher, something that would be at like the HyperX arena, you would definitely need full publisher integration approvals. They would be with you for every step of the way for those kind of tournaments. So when a team like Immortals is putting on a tournament, a League of Legends community tournament, we're well aware of those community guidelines the whole way through and getting these things approved in real time with Riot. You're right, we have kind of like an umbrella permission to use their IP as a team, a part of the franchise. But even still, when we go out and put on tournaments, League of Legends tournaments, pending the prize pool, pending where it's being streamed, pending how we're using their IP, there's strict brand guidelines around how we show a champion can't get cut off at the limbs. Like there's a 100-page deck of the brand guidelines around what you can and can't do with League of Legends characters and the logo and the coloring. We follow those closely, and that's a lot of what we're looking at all the time. So with regard for a team is putting it on, we can't really turn a blind eye to those things because they're watching what we're doing all the time. So we're getting approvals to use their game, at least in a competitive setting, when we're streaming it for tournaments constantly.
Yeah, if you get dinged, it's a little bit of a bigger deal than if most creators get dinged. So totally
Yeah.
get it. Sorry, Mustafa, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that like topic, we actually did a Miller Lite game night last year. It was like the It's Miller Time game night, and we did it on Among Us. And I specifically remember going through all these troubles, getting Innerslot to actually approve us to use that game as a part of that kind of package, right? Thankfully, Innerslot did give us the permission to use it, and we were able to host our game night on the Miller Lite Twitch channel. But it was a nightmare, like getting all those IP rights and everything. And they said, "Hey, please don't use our logos, don't use our text." It was the same. It was a nightmare on the Miller Lite side as well because they did not want to have any. They didn't want to step on any toes, right? So I think it happens like you said, like. Some people do turn a blind eye, but at the same time, I think there's definitely non-endemic partners that have a lot to lose to really pay attention to these things and not have their brand associated with a certain title if there's no permission to do so. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and just on the IP side, as in anecdotally, when you're talking about trademarks for any brands at all, you have a fairly affirmative duty to police your own trademark and prevent unlicensed uses of it. Otherwise, your mark can be diluted and you can lose control of it over it. There's tons of examples, in the marketplace of where that's occurred. So I can see, particularly for the sponsors, getting out there and shutting that down in a hurry.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, absolutely. We've only got about 5 minutes left here, so I just want to touch on one thing just because it's such a hot issue right now. As gaming becomes more and more of a lifestyle, in come the merchandise brands, right? So we're starting to see more gaming lifestyle gear, people wearing the jackets, shoe drops, everything like that. I know that there was Mustafa for SoaR Gaming. You had a partnership with Champion USA. Do you want to touch on what that was a little bit?
Yeah, so kind of just piggybacking off everything, like SoaR is an influencer-driven brand, and our guys are really kind of out there. They vlog and they do all these things. They're very into that hype beast streetwear type culture. So our job with Champion was like super cool. We were like the second esports entity to actually in gaming to do a limited drop with Champion, and we had license to actually use their marks on our hoodie. And our goal was kind of just to like really just tease a time and day. And for example, it was Friday night at midnight Eastern. And we learned that, gamers, they really do have a strong affinity to hype beast culture and then streetwear culture. And we also wanted to make sure our design kind of reflected that and had a story behind it. Our drop was titled Blueprint. And it was kind of like around the time where SoaR was kind of going through like its evolution into becoming like more of a structured company, because we were just COD kids a couple of years back, right? And we noticed that, it was a huge success because people love that there was a non-endemic brand that was kind of like, in that streetwear culture, but not really. They're not the supreme of the world, but at the same time, they're still kind of like cool and they're in your Paxtons and everything. And we were capped by Champion at 750 units for shipping and production timelines, and we were able to sell out in 20 minutes of going live. So that was kind of like a really good learning for our team. And I think a lot of people have really started to understand how much power there is in merchandise and apparel and licensing deals for merchandising. Because if you have a core brand apparel with non-endemic brand, it gets the gamers excited. You couple that with a really nice design. You only have 1 or 2 SKUs available, and the get it now or else it's gone forever aspect, I think it produces a winning apparel campaign. We've seen other teams done it as well with various different brands, and it's a growing thing.
Yeah, drop culture is getting absolutely nuts, especially with the rise of network and, sites like Hypebeast, right? Like, feels like every day there's something drop, and NFTs. Oh my God, every day there's something big dropping. Where if it's like, if you don't get this immediately, if you're not clicking right at the time, you lose it. And I would like to go over to the Immortals really quickly. Caroline with Immortals Essentials. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what Mustafa just talked about it, and this Hypebeast mentality is so true. And bringing cool factor to gaming. Gaming's already cool, but I also think at its core, right, like gaming is nerdy. This is like geek culture, and so it's also really fun that there is this scarcity and hype around clothing that sometimes has been reserved for traditional sports or other communities, and now gaming gets to be a part of that narrative and a part of like limited releases that people are waiting overnight outside of stores to get. And it's been fun to be a part of that, and it's fun to be legitimized and get credibility from the lifestyle and culture and clothing in that way, and product in general. I think that space is being dominated so heavily right now, and Immortals is well aware of that. And I think we took an interesting approach. We announced this about a month ago now, to kind of do the opposite. So, merch is hard to get by from certain brands. I think in the gaming space, we know some of these brands, these are super expensive, like limited releases, like $1,000 plus items. And our brand identity as a team is more supposed to be that like everyman's brand. And we want to make it more accessible and kind of like lower that barrier to entry, especially when esports can be such an intimidating space. That if you don't know what's going on, you don't already know everything about the LCS, like good luck getting caught up. So we're kind of trying to flip that on its head. So we've announced this thing called zero profit pricing with a new release of just essentials products. That's just Immortals logos and word marks on wearable everyday gear that's not for a season or for just 1 year. And the point of it was for us to not take any profits on it whatsoever, get the price down as wildly low as possible, so our producers and the fulfillment company can make their money, but we're not taking any money on it. There's no royalties whatsoever. As to kind of flip it on its head. So I think, right when one trend is blowing up, it's always interesting to look around and see what's happening on the other end. And it's usually smart to also try and do something that's completely opposing that. And we've seen a lot of, good feedback. I think there are people out there who don't want to spend $80 on a hoodie or $100 on a jersey. And we're looking to be a team that can kind of be more of an entry point into gaming, into esports, when sometimes, like I said, it's such a gate-kept ecosystem.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to spend $100 on a hoodie, but somehow it just keeps happening to me. The marketing works in the gaming place. Keith, I'm going to let you have the final word. We had a question come in that I think sums a lot of up what's happening to the ecosystem, what you're reading in the headlines more, which is how has the change in compensation structure and promotion algorithms through different platforms over time affected and informed the representation of players and influencers?
I'm not even sure I'm smart enough to understand that question. I honestly don't. I'm not sure exactly what it is asking. I don't know anything about promotion algorithms. The Caroline or Mustafa may know about something like that. I don't.
Well, I think that I'll ask a slightly different question that I think is getting to the core of the question then. Is that all of these, the distribution is beholden to these major platforms. And these major platforms, as we've seen recently, have their issues as well. So how has that changed the industry? The fact that there's been scandals on Twitch, there's been scandals with Facebook, Lord knows there's been scandals with YouTube.
Well, that is an entire day seminar on itself. I mean, you could mention Blizzard right now and look at what they're going through. So it's not just the platforms themselves, but right now, pretty much for this business, the only true game in town is Twitch and YouTube, as far as a distribution outlet for esports. I'm sure that there's others. as well to a lesser extent. And for right now, I don't see the landscape changing in the immediate future as far as those platforms as distribution outlets.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, thank you so much for that final word. Thank you so much to the BHBA for having us. Please find us all on LinkedIn or Twitter or Discord or one of the other million outlets to keep the conversations going. And Debbie, thank you so much you've worked so hard organizing this and you've been so wonderful. So I want to give a round of applause to Debbie too for being so helpful for all of this.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I said, but I really appreciate all your work on this. Phil, you've been a terrific moderator. I really enjoyed watching. It was very high energy, and I loved the dynamics between all the panelists. So thanks to Keith, Caroline, Mustafa, and to Judd, who had to jump off for their time. We really appreciate your taking the time to participate in a very engaging discussion. Just as a reminder for everybody, the links are still in the chat for the next minute, but you can check out upcoming events on the Beverly Hills Bar website for new CLE events that are coming up, and your CLE certificates will be emailed to you within the next 24 hours, and you should already have the CLE materials. If not, contact BHBA. All right. Thanks, guys. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.